My big question with the findings, you're unable to determine the effectiveness of the drugs. What's your recommendation to the DOC going into future executions? Should they continue using this 3-drug cocktail?
Which finding are you referring to?
In the report, you were not able to determine the effectiveness of the drugs because the IV.
The drugs worked. At the end of the day, despite the circulation issues that we had, the drugs did what they were designed to do. As far as Department of Public Safety making a recommendation to DOC as to which drugs are used, that's outside of our lane.
Tim Talley with the Associated Press. Can you implement all these recommendations, have the training that has been recommended, instilled in DOC by November 13th, which is the date of the next execution, a little over 2 months ago?
Good question. We do have a number of recommendations that you've seen in there, sir, and whether or not DOC can get all these recommendations implemented and get this new protocol in place, I don't know the answer to that. Because the last thing we want to do is rush this and have an issue come up where we're not prepared for the next execution.
Tim Talley, AP, should the execution process be stopped, halted until these things are implemented?
That's not a question I can answer, sir. That's going to have to be with someone outside of me.
Zebra Brand Center, Tulsa World. Who decided on Dazzlin as one of the drugs in this 3-drug cocktail?
I believe that wasn't something that was a part of our investigation, so I don't know who decided on that.
Do you know? Captain Hall?
Nah, I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure.
Ed Doney, News Channel 4, it said the physician requested a longer needle for femoral access. How much did that play a role in the needle dislodging or all of the things?
Captain Holt, would you address that?
What I will say is that as they started, they made several attempts. We did visit with numerous medical people, as is stated in our report during this investigation, and clearly stated in the report, they stated that in a medical setting, they would have rather have used something longer than what was used, which was, I believe, around 1.25 inches. So did it play a factor? I can't sit here and say that was the only factor, but I would say that was at least contributing to that.
Bob Sands, OETA. In reading your recommendations, I can't ever get the feeling that you kind of see this whole procedure they followed as old-fashioned, outdated, not modern. Going to Tim's question, they got a lot of work to do to get that way, don't they?
Well, the one thing I would say, sir, is I don't know if I agree with the statement that you made. This protocol that the Department of Corrections use has been challenged and has been deemed constitutional. The state of Oklahoma has done 110 consecutive lethal injections without an incident rising to this level. For the last 25 years, the state of Oklahoma has used lethal injection. So is there some things that need to be improved? Absolutely. Would I just deem this as antiquated, old-fashioned, and I don't know whether I agree with that or not.
Well, your own report says that they don't have modern forms of communication.
They stick colored pencils through the wall.
Pardon?
They stick colored pencils through the wall to communicate.
Yeah, and
We do think they need to improve their communication.
Maria Garcia, Fox 25 News. In the report, there is some evidence to suggest that the prisoner was trying to dehydrate himself. There were problems with the finding veins, which is consistent with dehydration, but you say that in the end there was no evidence of dehydration. Can you explain that?
Sure, the autopsy said there was no evidence of dehydration. At the end of the day, we're going to refer to the medical experts to make that determination, and they said there's no evidence of dehydration.
Even though there were problems with the veins?
Pardon?
Even though there were problems with the veins?
Yeah, there was no dehydration, and there was an issue getting the IV started.
Can you talk about how that's determined? No dehydration?
I am not a pathologist. Those folks at Texas who do this for a living, they are the medical experts that we use, and they are the ones that gave us determination that there wasn't dehydration.
Brandley Brewer, Daily Oklahoman. Where was Governor Fallon when the call was made to her office that only one main was viable, and who made the final call to proceed once that was cleared?
Could you break those questions up, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Where was Governor Fallon during the execution? And the second part of that question is, who made the final call to proceed with the execution once only one viable vein was there?
Do you know where the governor was at, Captain Holt?
I'm not certain exactly where she was.
I don't know where the governor was physically located at. And your second question was who made the call to proceed?
Once there was only one viable vein.
Well, protocol-wise, you know, they had difficulty in the arms, and they moved from the outward inward, and they ended up in the femoral vein, which was consistent with their protocol. There was never a stay issued, so there was no. As far as proceeding, I'm not sure how to answer that question for you.
Zebra Brand Center Tulsa World. So it was taking 43, or quite a long time to establish the ID, so nobody reported that to the governor's office.
The problems they had getting an IB started?
Right.
I don't know. Could you answer that, Captain Hook?
There was conversation back to the governor's office about it not starting as normal on 6 o'clock, yes.
And who was the governor's office or staff involved at all in the decision to go ahead and go forward? Or was that DOC's decision solely?
What I can speak to on that is the decision to move forward with this execution was the same as any of the past executions that they've had.
Janelle Steckline, CMHI. The execution has widely been described as botched. Was this a botched execution?
You know, different people have different perspectives. And how you describe this execution is how you describe it. At the end of the day, the drugs that were used to execute inmate Lockett for the crimes that he committed worked. So whether or not you consider that botched or not, I can't control how people report this story.
You recommended, Justin Doherty, News 9, you recommended a whole other set of drugs to have for backup, as well as several other monitors and things that cost a lot of money. Where would this funding come from to purchase these items that you've recommended?
Taxpayers.
Can you address not having a visual of the insertion point at all times because it was near the genital area and there was an effort, according to the report, to preserve Mr. Lockett's dignity? Can you address how much of a role that played into what happened?
Captain Holt, you want to answer that?
You know, it was determined and is in the report that those involved with the execution stated that they could have noticed the problem earlier if they had been monitoring the insertion site during that time. But you are correct in stating that the reason they didn't is the warden was concerned about Offender Lockett's dignity because his scrub pants had been cut away from him to gain that access, and that was their decision-making process and why they covered it.
In your opinion, is that the key reason why this?
If I could just add one thing to that, if this makes sense, covering that insertion point, that was consistent with their current protocol, and I do think that it contributed.
To what degree? Was that the reason
That
for the problem?
we think that the IV was a big issue with the execution.
Not
Absolutely.
having a visual.
Not having a visual, I think they probably could have spotted issues earlier than they did if they had eyes on it. Absolutely, I agree.
Carrie Aspinall, Tulsa World. You guys recommend in the report that they keep the IV insertion process open and visible during future executions. Does that mean keeping the blinds open for witnesses so that they can watch it?
Say that again, please, 'cause I think you
In
asked
the
me a couple of
report,
things.
You guys recommend that the IV process should be monitored and witnessed throughout the entire time?
Right.
So that people can keep tabs on it? Would that include keeping the curtain open for witnesses so they can watch this process?
Yes.
Tim Talley, Associated Press.
Sorry, I'll be right there.
Are the protocols in use in Oklahoma consistent with those in use in other states that you've checked?
Captain Holt did most of the particularly some of the areas in the that are contiguous to Oklahoma. He did most of that checking. But again, I'm not trying to be redundant. Protocol's been challenged as to whether or not it's constitutional, and it's been deemed constitutional. It has gone up to the federal level as far as being challenged. Yes, sir.
Rick Green, Oklahoma. Whose decision was it to have 2 executions on one day, and was there any opposition to it?
I think I can I can't answer the first part of that because that wasn't a part of our investigation. That wasn't a part of our something that we were asked to look into. I would assume there was some discussion between the governor's office and the Department of Corrections as how they arrived to the scheduling of the executions.
Marie Price with the Journal Record. The report makes several recommendations. Which would you say are the most vital, and is there a sequence in which they should be implemented?
I don't know whether any recommendation is more important than the other one, but I'm going to defer that to Captain Holt because he spent so much time putting this investigation report together.
Yeah, I would agree that I don't know that one is more vital than another. When we made those recommendations, we made them in the way that we want DOC to vet out each recommendation themselves before they put them into place. As to whether or not that's all of them, that's you probably have to visit with DOC about that.
Let me just follow. Carrier's next. I'm sorry, but I just need to follow up with just add one piece to that. And I did want to make this clear that throughout this whole investigation, there's been tremendous amount of cooperation with the Department of Corrections, the Governor's Office, and the AG's office. So we were tasked with putting these recommendations together, and I fully suspect or think that the Department of Corrections are going to give our recommendations due consideration. So how they move about prioritizing those, that's really going to be inside the Department of Corrections lane. Yes, ma'am.
The report says that from the toxicology, you guys were able to determine that he received above the therapeutic dose level of midazolam. How did they determine that, or can you give us any information based on that? Because the experts we've talked to say that midazolam is actually a drug that is dosed to effect, meaning it's a different dosage for every person, and it's one of those that they dose based on recommended effects. So how did they come up with that, or how did they determine that? Do you know?
I really can't talk to what those processes are that they came to determine that. No.
Ray Garcia, Fox 25 News. You said that witness testimony was wide-ranging, people saying that they saw different things. What kind of struggles did that cause for this investigation?
I'm going to answer the first part of it, then I'm going to defer that to Captain Holt. I'm pretty sure there were 36 people that witnessed this event. That number's right, isn't it?
Yeah, it's right around.
36. Different people had different accounts of that. And when we talked about a person may said something, if 10 people walked in here and I asked them, what color is that sign back there, I might get 8 different answers. So as far as putting it together as to what actually took place, it was very difficult. It was very arduous to go through that. And that's why this process was so long and so methodic, because they interviewed everyone and gathered and figured out where do we go next. I'll get you. Where do we go next and how do we move forward? But as far as the differing accounts of what took place, yeah, I do consider that was an issue as Captain Holt and his team moved forward with the investigation. And I'll let Captain Holt finish that.
It is. There's no difference in any other investigation that we might do. Eyewitness testimony is subjective at times, and we look at those and we reported the ranges that we found during our investigation.
But what difficulties did that cause for the investigation? Were you left with any questions?
I don't know about any questions. And again, there's not really difficulties because we're taking the information. We're there to find the facts. And that's what we reported is the facts showed that the explanations from each person in the viewing room was different. In fact, I'm not sure that there was one that was exactly the same as another. And some is there was 2 people sitting next to each other that I know for a fact witnessed different things or perceived things differently in their own mind.
Steve?
You were a witness to this and were interviewed by your own staff, so can you tell us what you told them, what you witnessed? Did you believe he was conscious and in pain?
Yeah, we were both witnesses. You know, you actually had a better seat than I did.
I've written what I saw, but I just wondered what you said.
I'm a little hesitant because I don't want to say exactly what's in I don't want to conflict with what I reported, but what I remember, because my interview's been some time ago,
Sure.
From my vantage point, I did see him strain at one point against his restraints. I absolutely did see that, yeah.
Graham Brewer, Daily Oklahoma. Part of your recommendations was a better communication link between the DOC and the governor's office, and also a better clarification on terminology. Can you go into more detail about what problems were encountered with both the communication link and terminology?
A little bit, and then I'll let Captain Hope finish that. One of the things that became apparent from me reading the report and talking to the investigators is the communication process was cumbersome. So in a situation like this, anything we can do to simplify that and make that more streamlined, I think it makes perfect sense. And I do believe that Department of Corrections is going to be all over that recommendation. And what was the second part of your question?
The terminology, what complications arose from lack of clarification on terminology?
Sure, terms matter. You know, and that's one thing that I think needs to be clear moving forward. It's not just me, it's the findings of the team. As you move forward, everyone should know if you say stop, what does stop mean? Everyone should know if you say halt, what does halt mean? Everyone should know if you say stay, what does stay mean? So everyone on the same sheet of music, and everyone will have an expected reaction to that term.
You mentioned there was a tremendous amount of stress on the OSP staff. Can you elaborate on that, how you came to that conclusion, what some of those interviews revealed?
I'm going to give that one, Captain Holt, if you'll address that.
You know, we interviewed more than one person that had been involved in more than one execution that just felt more stress on that day for different reasons than they had in the past. And, you know, that was their words to us. I don't know if you... That's what we got from them during the interviews.
Can you elaborate on what those reasons, some of those reasons were?
You know, I think some of it went from, you know, 2 executions being in one day with the extra duties that came with that. You know, there was a big media coverage already, not only due to the 2 being in one day, but due to the new drugs. And I believe, and in their statements, you know, that filtered down to them.
I'm going to go back in there and back here. I'll be right there, sir.
Arnold Hamilton, the Oklahoma Observer. On the drugs, did investigators tour the pharmacy and interview the pharmacist who filled the order?
The answer to your first question is no, we did not tour. The answer to the second question is yes, we did interview.
Okay. Was there any particular reason you chose not to tour the pharmacy to get a lay of the land of what the facility was like?
Because when we received the toxicology results of the drugs, not only for Lockett, but for Charles Warner, there was no indication that there was any problems with those drugs.
Yes, sir.
All right, Casey, okay? I mean, you said earlier the drugs did what they were designed to do. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. But here it says that the recommendations DOC obtain an additional set of execution drugs in the event an issue arises with the primary state.
Correct.
Can you just kind of elaborate, please, on why?
Sure. You know, and I'll take this. I hate to be redundant, but I will be. You know, for almost 25 years, 110 consecutive times, it worked. This time, obviously, it didn't, or we wouldn't all be sitting here in the training center. So in the event of having, you know, just trying to think of all issues that might surface in future executions, having a redundant drug or a backup drug on hand is probably a good idea. just for contingencies.
Justin Doherty, News 9. A lot of the discussion prior to Lockett's execution was the transparency of where the drugs came from. As far as the origin of the drugs, was that at all, did that come up in the conversations for recommendations at all? And if so, why was it not recommended to provide that transparency of where the drugs came from?
Yeah, I'll take that. If you're familiar with the conditions laid out in the executive order that started this whole investigation, there's nowhere in there. You know, really what we had to do was determine cause of death, which we didn't do. State of Texas did, Dallas County Medical Examiner, SWIFT's. Determine whether or not Department of Corrections followed through with their protocols and make recommendations. As far as having discussions or investigations into the drug itself, that was never in our lane, so we didn't explore that. Coming right there.
Max President, KJRH of Tulsa. Can you talk about what kind of rehearsal measures the execution team goes through prior to an execution? And then to follow up on Justin's question, because of the inexperience with the cocktail, was there any concern that was presented to you guys about actually administering it?
I'm going to take part of that, then I'll give that to Captain Holt, because I don't know if you've had a chance to download our report or not, but training is a big part of what we think can help make this a more efficient process. As far as the concerns with the drug itself, whether or not that surfaced in the interview, I don't know, but I'll let Captain Hope talk about that.
Let me address the first part, and I'll have to have you repeat the second. The first part is on the walkthrough. They do have several walkthroughs. You know, Lockett was actually scheduled to be executed months prior to April 29th, and they actually started those walkthroughs then and continued those throughout up until the 29th when the execution took place. You'll have to repeat your second question.
The second part of the question was the concern raised about administering something that hadn't been used.
I won't say that there was concern. What I will tell you is that they did have conversations and about what they needed to do as far as determining whether or not he was unconscious. The people that witnessed saw what they talked about. They waited 5 minutes after they administered the midazolam, checked for unconsciousness. He was still conscious at that time, and they had predetermined that they would wait 2 minutes in 2 minute increments after that and continue to check him until he was unconscious, at which time, after the first 2 minute time period, they determined that he was unconscious.
I think Tulsa World had a question.
The report mentions there was discussion inside the execution chamber about possibly administering life-saving measures, and they ultimately didn't get the order to or didn't decide to. They also mentioned there were some equipment problems, like they didn't have the right needles. Did they actually have any of the equipment that they would have needed to administer life-saving measures in the chamber? Did they have anything to do that if that had been ordered?
Captain Holt, if you addressed that, you probably got a better response on that.
They would have, like you would expect here, if somebody needed life-saving measures here, you'd have to be loaded up on an ambulance and taken to a hospital. They would have had, ultimately, if the order had been given, which it was not, they would have had to have transported Vander Lockett to a hospital.
Yes, sir.
Tim Kelly, AP, you say the drugs worked, but they didn't work very quickly. It still took 43 minutes for this man to be declared dead from those drugs. Does the report go into detail, I don't remember seeing it, into why it took so long for this to occur?
Trying to see how I can respond to that for you, sir. The drugs the process is designed to be introduced to the veins. After some point, it was obvious that there was something going on, and when the cheat was uncovered, that's when it was discovered that you had the large presence in the tissue. So the timeliness of it, I'm not a doctor, I can't address that, but it feels to me that it probably took longer to circulate through the body since it went into the tissue versus circulating through the veins. Yes, sir.
Ian Silver, Fox 23 in Tulsa. You have a recommendation that there be plans in place for a contingency in an event like this. You also talk about there was discussion for life-saving measures what can you tell us about what other discussions or options were presented or discussed in the room when all this was happening? What ideas did they have?
Captain Hope, why don't you address that, because you talk more closely with those folks.
You know, the conversations that immediately took place is that they were there to carry out a lawfully ordered execution. And so they continued to carry out that order. And so those are what the conversations were. In fact, you'll see in the report that they even try additional attempts in his other side groin area other than what they'd already tried. There was talk about life-saving measures. There was talk about using Charles Warner's as drugs. But in the end, what they determined was, in fact, prior to even completing the process of accessing the other femoral vein, they determined that the drugs were working as they were expected to work.
Ziva.
I'm still not sure exactly who decided that, what the therapeutic level of the dazolam is. Do you not know, or are you not saying?
Well, I don't know. I guess his response wasn't good enough for you earlier, but we're not making any medical determinations. We're poorly equipped. I mean, I can ask Jason something about criminal investigations or Title 47, but he doesn't have the depth to talk about medical findings. That's why we relied on Dallas County medical examiners to do this. So all we're doing in this report is reporting their findings.
So do you think the autopsy said that these were therapeutic levels? Because I didn't see that in the autopsy.
Our conversations with the pathologists at Dallas, when we went to Dallas, they stated that the level of midazolam in his system was above therapeutic levels.
Thank you.
Rick Green of Oklahoma. If he wasn't dehydrated, why was it so hard to find the vein?
Don't have the answer to that. I wish I did. We probably could be discussing something else right now. Just flat out don't have the answer to that. I can tell you, I think it's a good point to interject. There's a lot of discussion about the training of the person doing this, phlebotomist versus EMT. It was an EMT, a licensed EMT, as you saw in the report. And that licensed EMT had done this process a number of times. And for whatever reason, in this time, there was extreme difficulty getting access, getting a good IV into inmate Lockett.
Is this anybody's fault?
Yeah, I need to go to her because...
Dean Morales, NBC News. Can you tell me, after this execution, will there ever be an attempt to have two in one time period again, or will this change the course of how Oklahoma goes forward?
I really think that that is something we can easily control. I say we, even though the Department of Public Safety has no influence over that. I think having two probably did add a lot of stress, so I think that's one of our recommendations, not to do that. And I fully expect that the folks that are reading our recommendations would adhere to that. Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Is this anybody's fault? And, are you looking at pursuing charges against anyone?
We have there's nothing that we're looking at pursuing any charges against anyone.
And is there anybody that you can point the finger at to blame for this?
No.
Ray Garcia, Fox 25 News. I read the recommendations. Is there going to be any push? I know you can't force Department of Corrections to do these, but is there going to be any push from the Department of Public Safety to make these recommendations a reality?
I don't think we need to push it. I'm being redundant, but I will be. The Department of Corrections has been very open. They've allowed us. They had no influence on the outcome of this investigation, and I'm very confident that the Department of Corrections will look at our recommendations and give them due consideration, because I don't think there's anything in there that we recommended that's unreasonable.
In the documents you released last week with the autopsy,
Mhm.
there was it looked like a portion of in his EKG from the execution, was that the entire EKG, or did you guys redact it? Was that just a portion?
I don't know.
To my knowledge, because we actually asked that question during our investigation, that was the entire EKG.
But you can't, that's your knowledge, but you're not certain.
That's what they do is once the execution is completed, they put that in the body bag and transport that with the body, and that is what was delivered to Dallas.
Yes, sir.
Ed, on the News Channel 4, the physician mentioned he did not have an ultrasound machine, which he normally used to locate a vein. When he realized there was not one on hand, did that physician express any concern that there might be a risk in proceeding with the execution?
I'm going to let Jason finish this, but I think that I don't know whether there's any concern, but and I know I'm running the risk to sound like a broken record. They've done this for 25 years that way, without that machine, and they haven't had an issue to raise to this level. After this, there will be a lot of contingency equipment and plans and protocols in place, and I would assume that that would be one of the things that they have from this point forward. Jason, did you have anything to add to that?
There was no evidence that he made that concern on the day of the 29th. That came out of his interview with us, of course, several days later. So as of him making that concern then, there was no interview that led us to believe that he did.
Yes, sir.
Sean Usher with Capital. One of the recommendations you make is briefing the witnesses of the execution before they go in and telling them that they will and will not see certain things. In your mind, where's the line on what they should see and what they shouldn't see?
I'm kind of glad you asked that, because I think that's something we need to kind of get out in the open, because there's been a lot of discussion about the blinds being lowered. And the whole issue behind the blinds being lowered is the Department of Correction is required by law to conceal the identity of those folks in the execution room. So when it was clear that there was an issue going on, in order for that paramedic to come from that execution room to assist with what was going on at that point, we have to, it's not may, have to conceal that identity of that person. So that's why the blinds were lowered at that time. And as far as what witnesses see, I think I've been to executions before. I know Ziva's been to executions before. You've been to executions before. The shade goes up. The process starts. The process ends. Pronounced deceased. Shade goes down. Witnesses are escorted out. In this instance, it didn't. We had an issue, and they had to make a judgment call on the spot, and they did. Yes.
The report states that there was a schedule conflict with the original doctor, who I understand was far more experienced in carrying out executions, and that this doctor that was used had only done one previous execution. Did the original doctor in any way express concern and say that he didn't want to be part of this due to the concerns over this drug?
I'm going to kick that to Jason, but I don't think so. I don't know whether or not we even made any effort to have an interview with the original doctor, but Jason, I may have misspoke there.
We did not. We didn't interview the original doctor.
Yes, ma'am.
Marie Price with the Journal Method again, and forgive me if this has been asked before, but did you find any indication during the investigation that midazolam was a contributor? There seems to have been trouble with executions in some other states that use that same drug. Did you find any indication that it was an issue with Mr. Lockett?
There was nothing from our the medical folks that we consulted preparing this report that gave us any indication of that. Okay, guys, any questions? Yes, sir.
Just Story News 9, you mentioned partially of the stress would be the media attention. Going into November, this next execution, there could be equal, if not more, media attention. What kind of recommendations could the Department of Public Safety have to kind of help those stress levels going into that next execution for some of the prison staff, if any?
I'm going to take the first part of that, then I'm going to give that to Captain Holt. I really do believe training and preparation and knowing what to do when an emergency occurs really helps relieve a lot of stress. Just having some thought process, if this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this. And previously, there wasn't a contingency plan in place, so that's the reason that probably contributed to a lot of stress there. But moving forward, I think those folks are going to be very well trained and very well versed what to do in the event of an emergency.
You guys mentioned that you just finished this report last night, trying to put it out to the media and everybody as soon as possible. Were there any other state agencies allowed to review this report before you finished it and put it up for the media and the general public this morning?
I briefed the governor and the attorney general. They did not see the report. I briefed the Department of Corrections. All of this took place late yesterday afternoon, but they did not see the report. So when you guys saw it on our website at 9 o'clock this morning, that's the same time that the governor's office saw it. It's the same time the AG's office saw it. It's the same time that the Department of Corrections saw it. I thought that was very important that we be able to say that, and it's accurate.
I just thought of one more question. On pages 9 and 10 of the report, where there's the timeline related to Mr. Lockett, it indicates that DOC officials checked on him and either checked or adjusted his restraints. And this went on from 10-something in the morning to 4-something in the afternoon. Was Mr. Lockett restrained that entire time?
Oh, go ahead, Captain Holt.
He was for a majority of the day. I can't give you an exact time frame of for how long, but a majority of the time that he was at their IHCC, their emergency, their medical center, there on the grounds, he did remain in restraints.
I believe this was in the holding cell S2. Was he restrained there also?
Yes.
In what manner was he restrained? I guess I'm asking.
You'd have to get the actual definition from DOC. They defined it as soft restraints, is what he remained in while he was in IHCC.
How's it?
I don't want to hold you.
No worries. This is your
The
time.
report concluded that there were only minor deviations from the protocol. How does that square with the fact that a razor and a rope were found in his cell the day of the execution and that he supposedly ordered all this medication? It doesn't sound minor to me.
Well, that has nothing to do with the protocol. You talking about?
Isn't part of the protocol checking in the cell before the execution?
Yeah, I'll let Jason finish that, but inmate Lockett's ability to inmate Lockett was, I think he was written up for misconduct over 40 times during his incarceration. I think he was written up over half a dozen times for contraband during his incarceration. I think he had written up a number of times for battery during his incarceration. So the fact that he had the ability to hoard something in his, or have contraband in his cell, that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that had to deal with him over the course of his incarceration. And I'll just expand on that a little bit because I think you're going to go with the drug piece. It's pretty difficult for the folks at the OSP, the way that they administer drugs through a cubby hole, to ensure that he's not hoarding anything. You don't want, it's not as if you can open the door and hand it to him and look in his mouth and see whether or not he has it. You can't do that because of his, pardon?
Did you consider drug testing him to see if he had maybe been hoarding it or checking his levels?
Did they do drug testing to see?
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's a part of DOC's protocol or not. Or part, I wouldn't say protocol, part of their procedures or
They
not.
pretty often drug test inmates. I mean, that's a pretty common misconduct.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that for you. Sorry. Guys, I think we got the 3-minute mark. I'll end with this. It's kind of a commentary, and I'll be short because I know time's important. If you search for me on the internet, you'll see Mike Thompson, politician, state of Oklahoma. I'm not. I'm not a politician. All I am is a trooper and soldier. That's all I've ever been. And frankly, that's all I ever want to be. So having said that, I can say this. I don't really feel a pressing need to make political statements because I'm not concerned about getting voted in or out of office. But the point that I want to make is just simply this. There have been a number of people who have told me that they felt there's been some effort to portray Lockett as a victim in this. Whether you believe this or how you move forward with your investigation or how you report this, that's up to you. I'm not trying to influence that. The thing that I'm asking, respectfully, is that you consider the family in this. Lockett left real victims in his wake. He shot a 19-year-old girl dead with a shotgun and buried her while she was still alive and laughed about it. That's cruel. And before he did that, he brutally raped her friend. And after he killed her, he brutally raped her friend again. So there are real victims in this. Real victims. I'm not going to get into discussion as to whether or not Lockett was a victim or not, but there are real victims here. And as you move forward with your reporting, those folks have to live with that. Every time they see Lockett's picture on television, in a newspaper, on the internet, you're poking at that wound that they have. And victims have rights, and they don't get the attention that they deserve. So as you move forward respectfully, not trying to ask you to change your reporting, but you just consider how that story is going to impact those families that are still suffering from this.